Face it, your drum recording sucks. That's probably why you're watching this video. Whether it was the nasty sounding room you recorded in, the cheap ass drum set you used, or your gear just wasn't quite up to par. Whatever the case is, the sound is bad. Kind of something like this. Fortunately, there's a fix. It's not perfect, but it'll improve your drum sound tremendously from where they currently are. The truth is, recording great sounding drums is expensive. It's just simply out of reach for most of us. You need a great drum room, which is usually a room with wooden walls, wooden floors. It's big with a high ceiling. Then you need a nice drum set. You know, maple, birch, something that's not $500, something that's actually made of quality that usually costs over $2,000 or $3,000. Then you need the brand new drum heads, and you need to change those drum heads and tune them properly every song for the highest sound quality. Not many of us have that luxury. So instead, we turn to something called drum sample replacement. Sample replacement used to be a long, tedious task that mix engineers got paid big money to do, so it was worth it. Recording budgets are small these days, and in fact, you're probably doing your own mixing, so there's no one paying you the big bucks to do this. Well, lucky for you, and lucky for me, there's an awesome plugin that makes this job faster and better than previous drum sample replacement tools. This plugin is called Trigger, and it's from the folks at Slate Digital. The Platinum version, which is the one I'll be using today, costs around $200, and the EX version, which has less samples, can be had for less than $100, which is less than the cost of a decent snare drum. So let's get right into using this plugin the correct way. I'm not going to cover all of the controls because they're not important. You can read the manual for that. However, I'm going to demonstrate how relatively easy it is for you to change the sound of your crappy drums to those that sound like $1,000,000. Okay, so I already have Trigger loaded up on 3 tracks. On my master track, I have 2 plugins. I have Ozone so the audio doesn't go over, and Distort on the screen capture recording, and I also have K-meter open just so I know that I'm pretty much around the same level. So first of all, I'm going to go to FX, and I'm going to type in Trigger, and here's my Slate Trigger plugin. Okay, first thing I want to do, go to Settings, and make sure I have my detection mode to accurate, which is what you want to use when you're mixing. MIDI is off. I'm not using any of that, so just to make sure it's not taking up any unnecessary CPU usage, I have that stuff disabled. I don't know if it really makes that much of a difference, but to me it does. So I just have that set to that. And right now we are on the snare track, as you can see up here, where it says track 2 snare. I always label my tracks just for organizational purposes. And I'm going to go here. I have my instrument folder under settings set to program files. I think Trigger Library is where I have it. And so this automatically pops up over here. And I have their Deluxe collection and their Platinum collection to choose from. And just to make this easy and fast, I'm going to go to the Platinum Kit presets, and I've already decided which snare sample I want. I want the All-American Kit snare, so I'm just double clicking, and then down here, snare5.prs preset, and then that'll load 3 samples. One of these I believe is muted. Yeah, that one's muted, and this one is reduced to a pretty low level. So actually, I want to show you what I have on my snare track right now, soloed, without this. It's a very weak sound, it's uninspiring. It's a snare drum, but it's a shitty snare drum. So here we go, back to trigger. I'm gonna go to my input setting and set that up. And the idea is that, actually this needs to get cleared off, so I just hit the settings control. Waveforms are gonna pop up right here once I hit play. And the idea is that my snare hits need to be the maximum width of this little window. Right now they're in the middle, so I'm going to put this to 6, the input right here. And my hits are inconsistent. This is typical of drum recordings that weren't compressed on the way into the converter's input. So that's pretty much good at 5 decibels. I could run a compressor in the software in order to even that out, but I have controls in Trigger that kind of take care of that problem for me. So the first thing I want to do, because this is a pretty slamming track, if you listen to this, it's a pretty fast tempo. I want it to have as much impact as possible. So down here we have our articulation settings. Right now it's on the full snare drum, and I can cycle through this by, I clicked it and I'm dragging up just to the rim shot. Or we can just have soft hits. But what I'm after for this particular area of the song, or of this track really, it's not a song, is this one, which is Snare Horn. That'll give me a consistent level. It'll blend in a rock mix or whatever I'm doing very well. It's typically what I use for rock songs, metal songs, pop songs. You know, everything's typically aggressive now. During softer sections of a song, I'll automate that, and I'll get to that later. But for right now, I want this to be on snare hard. And my input's good. So next I have these settings right here: sensitivity, retrigger, and detail. I pretty much got the following descriptions from the manual. So, oh, you know what? I did forget to mention these samples. Z1 is a combination of a close microphone and overhead microphone. Phones with an S, plural. And there's a Z2 sample that has compression added. It fits the mix better, that I don't have up right now. And it's not available on all the samples. And then there's also the Z3, which is the close mic only, which works well if you want to do a mix of sample replacement along with your original drum sound. But because my drums sound like shit, I'm replacing them entirely. And then we also have over here how it says SSDR. That stands for I think Slate Digital, or Steven Slate Drum Room, which is a large concrete warehouse with room ambient mics that's heavily processed. So it's got an awesome little sound to it. Actually, I'll solo that so you can hear it. It's just like somebody's hammering. But that combined with the snare Z1 sounds really, really cool. And then finally we have the Nrg samples, which are taken from a very famous Studio A at Nrg Studios in, I think, Los Angeles, California. Unprocessed as compared to the SSDR samples that are processed. These have no processing, but they sound great. I'll solo these so you can hear them. It's got a very quick decay. It sounds lovely, in my humble opinion. I use it a good amount. So, there's a warning though. Do not mix Z1 and Z2 samples with Z3 of the same instrument or the same sample type. So Snare 5 Z1 should not be mixed with Snare 5 Z3 or Z2 with Z3. But you can mix the other snare Z1s with different Z3s. But if you do, it'll have a phase issue, which you actually might want for a creative effect. But if you're not going for a creative effect, then avoid that. Okay, second thing I should do. Up here we have a high pass filter. It's already set to 10 kilohertz, but I want this higher, right around maybe 100 hertz, 110. And what that'll do is it'll get rid of any possible bass bleed from the snare mic, because the original sounds like this. And you can hear a kick drum in there. And the hi-hat. But the hi-hat's not going to be filtered, but the bass will. So it's always good to have that first. So I'm going to play this again because it does change the level of the input. Yeah, okay, so I just bumped it back up to 6 because the low cut, or the high pass, whatever you want to call it, made that reduce in level. Oh, by the way, if you can't get your drum hits to be the maximum width of this window, I would use a plugin like FreeG to increase the level. Also, in Reaper RIA EQ, if you just use the gain and not the equalizer, it'll work as well. You're looking for a clean gain. Not that it really matters, but just something that's not going to take up a lot of CPU usage. Okay, so this is what they suggest in the manual. So I've already adjusted the input, and then the next thing I'm going to do is put my retrigger value to the character of the drum. So in snare, this is between 21 milliseconds to 45 according to the manual, so I'll put it on like 31. And the detail setting is set visually within this window. The idea is that you put it just above the leakage and noise, which I'll show you. I'm going to zoom in. This is a really cool control they added. You can zoom in and make that bigger so that this is a little bit easier to handle with the detail setting. So I'm going to bring the detail setting all the way up where it's not triggering. Now you'll see these blue markers that are tiny. I'm going to pause it so this doesn't move. You see these smaller waves down here? That's the kick drum, more than likely. And that's not what I want to have triggered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this detail setting down so it's just above the kick drum. Now I don't want it to be too close, you know, where it's like a millimeter away or something. I want that to be above it, but not too above it. So that's pretty good. I'm going to actually zoom out and see where that looks. So that looks pretty good to me. Now, and the final setting we have is sensitivity, which they suggest to have it 0 to begin with, but by default it's on 40. So the range of 35 to 65 is usually good, but more than likely you're going to need to automate this control. So I'll put it back to 40 because it seemed to be doing a good job there. Now, Back up to here, we have a mix control, which you can do anywhere from 0%, and that'll get us the original snare signal back in there, which I don't want. Or we can blend it, 50%, 80%, and the number indicates how much the sample replacement is blended in. So let me do just 30 so you can hear what I'm doing. And the cool thing about Trigger is they've replaced things in a phase accurate sense, meaning that if you do choose to use this mix knob, it shouldn't sound like crap, to put it simply. But I'm going to replace this entirely because I don't like the way it sounds, and there's a good amount of hi-hat bleed that I don't want on the track, and all these things that blend into the track once I start piling other instruments up on top of the drums that already are taking up a good amount of room in the mix, then you just start having a lot of issues. But if I really wanted to, 80% isn't too bad. Then we get a little bit of bleed. Bleed's not always bad. But I want everything on there. Anyway, let's go down to these controls here. Again, these are our samples, and our controls with the samples, the input level, or actually the output level on the individual samples. This one is Z1, and it's at 0 decibels. We also have a pan right here. You can change the pitch of the sample, and I actually rarely use these, but I believe they control the decay and the attack, so like how soon the sample hits and things like that. But that, again, that's stuff you can look up in the manual if you try this plugin. Now over here we have the room mic set to -12, so I can bring this louder if I want. One of the tricks is when you go to the chorus of a song, you reduce the room mics so that it sounds like the snare is getting closer to the speaker. Personally, I like reverb, and this is real reverb, so I like to have my instruments sounding as lively as possible. So, but that's always a thing you could automate. Okay, on to the final one. It's muted, so I'm not really going to talk about it, but you can see that as I go through all these over here, the way that they respond changes, and you can adjust that for your own needs. Again, this is all in the manual, but what I'm going to focus on is the important controls down here, which will enable me to do whatever the heck I want with my samples, which this dynamics control, basically over here, this knob, if you set it on a lower setting, basically anything to the left of the 12 o'clock position, so I think that's 0.50, yeah, is in dead center. So I'm going to go all the way to 0, and this will make my hits louder. And then couple that with velocity, which basically sets how many light or how many aggressive samples are used. And I want, if anybody who's familiar with MIDI understands what velocity is. And so I'm going to actually put this all the way up to 1.00 because I want every hit to be aggressive sounding. And now I'll do the opposite so that I'm only getting, actually, I gotta switch this to snare full in order for this to work. And now everything, let's see, dynamics. I'm gonna have the full range of dynamics, and I'm only gonna have light hits. And actually, I forgot one more other thing. This link control down here is pretty important. So I'm going to hit that, and now this should change for all of my other settings, which it didn't for some reason. Oh wait, oh, the velocity setting. Okay, it's an individual setting, I guess. All right, it's working now. Okay, so they're all equal. I think that's pretty important to do. And again, over here on articulation, I can put this to just snare soft and then get really soft hits. Or whatever you want, really. It's a really, really easy to use plugin. And okay, I'm gonna put it back to everything hard, and my dynamic settings back to everything hard as well. So now we should have some cool sounding samples. Before, I think, because I didn't have that link setting highlighted, I don't think the SDR sample was to the right one. So let's just play this now. Okay, so I explained how to do it. Let me just show you how fast it is for me to do this on the kick drum sample. So I'm going to solo this and load trigger up and not talk. Actually, I'll just lead you through this one again. So again, Platinum kit presets, All American, kick 10, PRS, and then I'm going to change my sensitivity. The manual recommends, let's see. Manual recommends, again, around the 45 range. Actually, for re-trigger, sensitivity is actually around 45. The re-trigger setting for kick drums is 20 to 100 milliseconds. So really it varies depending on like the decay of your kick drum. The shorter the decay, the faster you can set this. So I'm going to take a look at this once I start playing it. I'm going to hit my detail all the way up so it doesn't trigger anything yet. And I also want to hit my input up. One thing that I've found is sometimes the re-trigger, setting with the red can kind of confuse you. So what I like to do is play this and then pause it